The tomato plant droops, its foliage edged with a sickly yellow hue, and the soil, utterly depleted, crumbles like ancient cinders between one's fingers. $200 were allocated to nutrient supplements this season, and 3 excursions were made to the local garden supply store, yet the vegetation continues to languish. However, 3 feet beneath that struggling patch of earth, a plastic container and a modest quantity of small, crimson annelids possess the capacity to revitalize the entire garden without further expense within 90 days. This method obviates the need for soil aeration, the laborious process of turning a substantial compost heap, or the physically demanding labor typically associated with weekend gardening. Instead, a silent, subterranean laboratory diligently replicates nature's millennia-old processes, albeit at an accelerated pace, directly at the root system. This represents an extraordinary resourcefulness in contemporary horticulture, and those who have adopted this technique seldom revert to their previous methods. Part 1 delves into the unseen crisis directly beneath our feet. What if the fundamental issue was never with the plants themselves? For an extended period, the prevailing advice has remained consistent. Increase watering, augment fertilization, and intensify pest control measures. Nevertheless, the tomatoes persist in their diminutive size, the peppers stubbornly refuse to bear fruit, and the green beans languish in soil that appears outwardly healthy but is demonstrably deficient. The unvarnished truth is considerably more sobering. Modern synthetic fertilizers operate on a straightforward exchange: immediate nourishment for the plant, followed by long-term depletion of the soil. These azure crystals and granular white compounds stimulate a temporary surge in growth over a few weeks, but they silence the myriad of microscopic organisms, such as bacteria, fungi, and earthworms, that are naturally responsible for nutrient recycling within the earth. Without their vital activity, each subsequent growing season commences with diminished vigor compared to the last, and this decline accelerates with each passing year. Consequently, the garden gradually loses its inherent ability to sustain itself. This is not a trivial concern. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization has issued a stark warning, indicating that approximately 1/3 of the world's soils are already in a state of moderate to severe degradation. When a soil community loses its living components, its capacity to retain moisture, hold essential nutrients, and support plant life is compromised. It ceases to be fertile soil and transforms into mere dirt. Why is this critical information so seldom articulated publicly? The rationale is pragmatic. Marketing healthy soil presents a significant challenge, whereas promoting a bag of blue crystals that visibly enhances plant coloration within 48 hours is commercially facile. The underlying logic is driven by economics rather than deliberate malevolence, yet the outcome is identical. Gardens across the globe are being inadvertently exhausted into decline. Consider this perspective, which often unsettles seasoned gardeners. The most successful garden is not necessarily the one most heavily reliant on fertilizer, abundant mulch, or the most sophisticated implements. Rather, it is the garden that requires the least external intervention. This represents a subtle yet profound achievement, standing in stark contrast to the prevailing messaging found in nearly all horticultural advertisements. The solution is not contained within a bottle, nor is it stocked on the shelves of garden centers. Instead, it resides on the kitchen counter, within the discarded coffee filter, the remnants of an eggshell, or the peel of a banana from the previous evening's meal. Part 2 explores the understated wisdom of traditional gardening practices. Prior to the advent of synthetic fertilizers, how did families manage to sustain their gardens throughout the winter? The answer lay within every household. Grandparents had no garden centers to frequent. Their resources included used coffee grounds, pulverized eggshells, the leftover remnants of supper, the ashes from their wood-burning stoves, and the water used to rinse vegetables. Through these means, they cultivated tomatoes that would shame any produce found under the artificial lighting of contemporary supermarkets. Take, for instance, the humble eggshell. Once rinsed, dried, and finally ground into a coarse powder, an eggshell liberates calcium carbonate, the identical mineral that effectively prevents blossom end rot, that unsightly dark discoloration that spoils a substantial proportion of tomatoes and peppers. Herein lies a common initial misstep. Discarding whole or half eggshells into a garden bed can prolong their decomposition for years. When pulverized to a consistency akin to cornmeal, however, their calcium content is released over a period of months. A dedicated coffee grinder, reserved solely for garden use, accomplishes this task in mere seconds. Then there are used coffee grounds. This is an area where virtually every online gardening resource airs. Used coffee grounds are not inherently acidic. The brewing process extracts the majority of the acid, which is then consumed in the beverage. The grounds that remain in the filter are nearly neutral, with a pH typically ranging from 6.5 to 6.8, a range remarkably close to the ideal pH for a vegetable garden. The genuine value of coffee grounds lies elsewhere. They nourish the soil's microbial inhabitants, contribute slow-release nitrogen, and enhance soil structure without significantly altering its pH, irrespective of how frequently this misconception is propagated online. The esteemed horticulturalist Alan Titchmarsh has employed these economical techniques for over 50 years, incorporating items such as banana peels, wood ash, nettle infusions, and comfrey leaves. The Royal Horticultural Society in Britain has meticulously documented these kitchen-based gardening methods for generations. None of these practices are novel. In fact, most predate the invention of the compost bin itself. Nevertheless, when simply scattered on the soil's surface, these discarded materials offer only limited benefits. Rainfall washes them away, ants pilfer them, and the sun bakes them dry before the microbial community can effectively process them. The true transformation, the kind that converts a struggling garden into a flourishing one, only commences when these materials are deliberately incorporated beneath the surface. Part 3 unveils the ingenious waste diversion technique, a backyard alchemical laboratory. When the compost pile is relocated from a peripheral corner of the yard to a position directly beneath the tomato plants, a profound metamorphosis occurs. Most gardeners have, at some point, experimented with a conventional compost bin. The inherent drawbacks are readily apparent. It occupies a sunny location, often emitting odors during warmer months. It necessitates regular turning with a pitchfork every few weeks, a task that becomes nearly insurmountable for individuals over the age of 65, particularly those experiencing shoulder or knee ailments. Furthermore, by the time the compost is finally ready, typically after 6 months, it must be transported in heavy containers across the yard and manually disseminated. A far more discreet approach exists, one that has been utilized in experimental permaculture gardens for decades and is referred to in some scientific circles as a subsurface bioreactor. This designation, while complex, describes a remarkably straightforward concept: a backyard alchemical laboratory discreetly positioned where the plants are actively growing. This method requires approximately 10 minutes to implement and incurs virtually no cost. Begin with a food-grade plastic bucket, the 5-gallon variety often generously provided free of charge by bakeries in Dallas. Drill holes no smaller than ½ an inch in diameter around the sides and base of the container. This addresses a second common oversight that is seldom highlighted. Quarter-inch perforations are insufficient. They impede the passage of worms and restrict the entry of plant roots. A minimum of ½ inch holes is recommended, with larger dimensions being even more advantageous. Excavate a cavity in the center of the garden bed, of sufficient depth so that only the top 4 inches of the bucket, along with its lid, remain exposed above the soil surface. Position the bucket within the excavated area and refill the surrounding earth. This completes the setup. The bucket now functions as a perpetual feeding station for all plants within a 3-foot radius. Each evening, kitchen scraps are directly introduced into the container. Banana peels, used coffee grounds, crushed eggshells, tea bags, carrot tops, apple cores, and wilted lettuce. Secure the lid and depart. This eliminates the need for turning, prevents odors due to the sealed lid and subterranean placement, and deters pests such as raccoons and rats, which cannot access the sealed and buried contents. For those who prioritize aesthetic appeal over mere practicality, an unglazed terracotta pot proves even more effective than plastic. Terracotta's inherent porosity allows liquid nutrients, commonly referred to as leachate or compost tea, to gradually seep through its clay walls into the surrounding soil, providing a continuous, gentle nutrient supply for weeks after a single filling. Two stacked terracotta pots, with the upper one inverted to serve as a lid, create a miniature alchemical tower that can remain functional in the garden for up to a decade. Here lies a small yet significant truth that warrants attention. Much of the bagged compost commercially available at garden centers is sterilized. While this high-temperature treatment effectively eradicates weed seeds, it also eliminates the vast majority of the beneficial microorganisms that are essential for the efficacy of genuine compost. A buried bucket, replenished daily with fresh organic matter, yields a product that a sealed plastic bag can never replicate: living compost. However, the bucket itself serves merely as a structural component. The true agents responsible for breaking down the scraps, and this is where nearly every novice gardener commits their most significant error, is where the narrative takes a peculiar turn. Part 4 explores the reasons why most garden worms perish in a compost bin. Why do so many individuals attempting this precise methodology encounter failure on their very first endeavor? The reason is the introduction of the incorrect species of worm into the container. Visit any local bait shop and request worms. The receptacle on the counter will likely contain large, robust night crawlers, scientifically classified as Lumbricus terrestris, the very image that typically comes to mind when one hears the word worm. Introduce a dozen of these creatures into a compost bucket, having paid a premium of $12 for the privilege, and within a week, the majority will have perished. The cause is biological, not a matter of misfortune. Night crawlers are adapted to burrowing deeply. In their natural habitat, they inhabit permanent vertical tunnels that extend up to 6 feet into undisturbed soil. They subsist on soil and decaying leaves, which they draw down from the surface during the night. They are not equipped to consume fresh kitchen waste. Introducing them into a shallow, nutrient-rich compost environment induces panic, leading to overheating and death within days. The worm that is genuinely suited for the bucket is smaller, redder, and seldom available at American bait shops. Its scientific designation is Eisenia fetida. Most gardeners know it by a more approachable moniker, the red wiggler. Red wigglers are classified by biologists as